You'd think Chernobyl would be a dead zone, but a lot of life is thriving and changing in surprising ways. Frogs are changing color, dogs are building radiation resistance, and catfish are turning into underwater tanks. These are terrifying Chernobyl mutations caught on camera. What you're looking at here is a frog affected by the radiation of Chernobyl. In 2016, two Spanish researchers, Pablo Barroco and German Oriazola, were studying how life was bouncing back in Pripyat, and they noticed something strange: black frogs. Now, obviously, dark-colored frogs on their own aren't unusual, but the type of frog they were looking at, Hyla orientalis, a tree frog native to the area, is usually bright green. So what happened? Well, it turns out it might be evolution caused by the radiation. The darker skin isn't random. These frogs have developed higher levels of melanin, the same pigment that protects human skin from UV damage. In this case, it helps block radiation from damaging the frog's cells. And it seems this shift happened fast. Within a few decades, a bright green species started turning dark to survive in a nuclear zone. It's one of the clearest examples of nature adapting. Instead of dying out, these frogs have adjusted their biology to deal with one of the harshest environments on the planet. This is Jeremy Wade, River Monsters guy, pulling a massive catfish out of one of the cooling ponds near the Chernobyl power plant. These ponds are still radioactive. Wade mentioned the fish he caught had radiation levels about 16 times higher than normal. But what really grabs attention is the size of these things. They're huge. People have wondered if radiation is causing these fish to mutate and grow into monsters, but it may not be the radiation that's making them giants. It's more about the environment. These ponds are closed off, meaning the catfish are at the top of the food chain. No predators, tons of food, and people even feed them sometimes, so over time they just get bigger and bigger. They're living longer as well, which adds to their size. Now, that doesn't mean they're not being affected by the radiation. They're definitely soaking it in, and scientists are still studying whether there are long-term mutations or effects we can't see from the outside. Either way though, these catfish are a real reminder of how life can keep going in places where it really shouldn't. Wolves in Chernobyl aren't just surviving, they might actually be evolving. In 2014, Dr. Cara Love and her team from Princeton headed to the exclusion zone and put GPS collars on several wolves to track them. These collars didn't just show where the wolves were going, they also measured radiation exposure in real time. The wolves were getting hit with radiation levels up to 6 times the legal safety limit for humans every single day. That should be deadly, but instead of dying off, the wolves seem to be adapting. BLOOD samples showed changes in their immune systems, almost like what you'd see in a person going through radiation therapy. Even more interesting, parts of their DNA looked like they were evolving to resist cancer. In a place where cancer risk should be through the roof, these wolves are developing ways to fight it. Now, because of the situation in Ukraine and obvious safety concerns, the research is slowed down, but if what they've actually found holds up, these wolves might be the key to understanding how to survive in high radiation environments. Because we all want to do that, right? Maybe even how to treat cancer in humans one day. Now that we definitely want. Wild boars in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone are basically radiation sponges. Out of the animals still hanging around, these guys are carrying some of the highest levels of radioactive material in their bodies, and it all comes down to what they eat. Boars dig through the soil looking for roots, insects, and mushrooms, especially deer truffles. And those truffles are loaded with radiation because the soil around Chernobyl is still contaminated. So the boars eat and the radiation builds up inside them. Over time, it's had some nasty effects. People have reported sightings of boars with strange growths, tumors, physical deformities. It's not like they're growing extra legs or anything out of a comic book, but their bodies clearly aren't doing great. Radiation messes with their cells and weakens their immune systems, making them more likely to get sick or develop weird internal issues. But even still, they are surviving. Maybe not as well as the dogs or wolves, but they've managed to reproduce and live in this environment. Some are even leaving the exclusion zone and mixing with boar populations in other parts of Europe, which is kind of concerning. So this may not be a living thing, but considering it's a glob of radioactive goo, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is. It's known as the elephant's foot, one of the most famous concoctions to come out of the Chernobyl disaster. After Reactor 4 blew up, a bunch of nuclear fuel, metal and concrete fused together under the plant and cooled into this massive lump of radioactive material, and it kinda looked like a deformed elephant's foot. Thus it was dubbed the elephant's foot. When this thing was first formed, it was putting out so much radiation that standing near it for just a few minutes could kill you. Not exaggerating. People who had to go near it in the early days of cleanup would get a lethal dose of radiation in minutes. One guy who filmed it back in the 80s was reportedly dead within a year. Even now, decades later, it's still dangerous. The radiation has cooled down a bit, but not enough to really make it safe. Scientists have kept an eye on it over the years because they were worried it might keep leaking radiation or start heating up again. It's also affected the air, water, and soil around it. They call the elephant's foot a kind of man-made lava, except instead of burning you, it poisons you. And yeah, it's still sitting there, deep under Reactor 4, slowly decaying, but still very dangerous. Now, right next to the Chernobyl plant is a place called the Red Forest, and it got that name for a pretty grim reason. When Reactor 4 exploded, it sent a radioactive cloud directly over this patch of forest, and within hours, the pine trees turned a weird rust red color. Basically, they died almost instantly from radiation exposure. That entire section of forest just collapsed. But over the years, new trees started growing again. Not quite like before though. Scientists have found trees with bizarre growth patterns. Some have twisted trunks, stunted branches, or grow at strange angles. A few have odd discolorations or split limbs that don't match normal growth cycles. Even now, decades later, radiation levels in the Red Forest are some of the highest in the whole exclusion zone. The forest acts like a sponge, so any rain that soaks into the soil can stir up radioactive particles again. Now, beside the massive catfish in the cooling ponds near Chernobyl, smaller fish in the rivers and lakes around Pripyat have shown some pretty unsettling traits. Researchers have talked about fish with physical deformities like missing eyes, bulging growths coming out of them, or just oddly shaped in general. The radiation that poured into the nearby waterways didn't just disappear, it seeped into the water, settling in the silt and got into the food chain. Small aquatic creatures absorbed it, and the fish that ate them absorbed even more. That kind of exposure messes with how cells divide and grow, and that's how you end up with fish that look like Blinky from The Simpsons. And then there are all the issues you can't see with the naked eye. Some fish are born sterile, others just don't live as long as they should, but there are still plenty swimming around. The strange thing is that some species have adapted better than others. Mutations don't always kill them off right away, they just make the fish look off. So while they might not be glowing like in cartoons, they're definitely not normal. This is one of the darkest and hardest to talk about. After the explosion, over 600,000 people were called in to help contain the disaster. These weren't all volunteers. Many were soldiers, firefighters, and regular workers who didn't fully understand how dangerous the job was. They were called liquidators, and their job was to clean up the mess, build the sarcophagus over the reactor, and stop the radiation from spreading. There's tons of footage and photographs of these people working away in Chernobyl, completely unaware of how the radiation would affect them later on. A lot of them went in without proper protection too, some with just a cloth mask or nothing at all, and the effects were brutal. Radiation burns, organ failure, thyroid cancer, and in some cases death within mere days. Some liquidators were exposed to such high doses that their bodies literally started breaking down on a cellular level. Some survivors lived for years afterward, but a lot of them did deal with long-term health issues like tumors, birth defects in their children, bone diseases. There are stories of liquidators who ended up completely isolated physically and emotionally, wrecked from what they experienced. So when people talk about mutations, it's not just fish and frogs, it's human lives that were permanently altered. After the Chernobyl disaster, everyone had to evacuate. Of course, that meant most pets, especially dogs, dogs got left behind. Well, in the decades since, those abandoned pets have multiplied into entire packs of wild dogs living in and around the exclusion zone. A recent study from the University of South Carolina and the National Human Genome Research Institute looked into 302 of these dogs. The goal is to see how radiation may have affected them over generations, and it turns out that these dogs aren't just surviving, they might actually be doing pretty well. Unlike bees and some other animals that seem to struggle with reproduction in the area, the dogs are doing just fine. They're reproducing normally, raising litters, roaming free. Scientists believe they may have developed some kind of resistance to the radiation. There's even early evidence showing they're less prone to cancer. Now, we're not saying they're invincible, obviously, but if these dogs really have adapted to these high levels of radiation, that could mean their biology is changing to handle one of the deadliest threats on Earth. It's still early days in the research, but it's enough to make you stop and think. Somehow, these animals have managed to carve out a life in one of the most hostile places on the planet, and that is pretty nuts. If you want straight up visible proof of mutation from Chernobyl, check out the Firebugs. These little red and black bugs are normally easy to spot because they have a really distinct pattern. But in the exclusion zone, researchers started finding ones that looked all kinds of messed up. Patterns were totally off. Some bugs had their markings in the wrong spots, others were missing parts altogether. Scientists Timothy Mousseau and Anders Moller actually did a study and found that the bugs living closer to the reactor were way more likely to have these deformities. They photographed tons of them and compared them to firebugs from outside the zone, and yeah, the difference is obvious. It's not the most dramatic mutation you'll ever see, but it's one of the clearest cases that got caught on camera. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.